Capstone in Humbervale. Over the past month as a church, we have been focusing on the topic of prayer. And so for this devotional, I want to talk about the often forgotten response of God to our prayers. And so I'm going to be sharing from Psalm 18, verses 1 to 19. And I would encourage you all to read the rest of the chapter in its fullness in your own time. But it starts like this. It's a Psalm of David. It says, "I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold." And so David here, he starts by recognizing who his God is. He says that he is a rock, a strength, a fortress, a deliverer, a refuge, a shield, a salvation, and his stronghold. And then the verse continues on, the passage continues on. It says, "I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears." In this verse, we kind of get a little bit of a window into David's heart of how he was feeling in this time. David was feeling distressed, overwhelmed, entangled, like the coils of the grave were coiled around him. He'd felt confronted by death. He felt surrounded and overwhelmed. And I don't know about you guys, but there's been times definitely over the past year where I've felt the same. I felt confronted. I felt surrounded. I felt overwhelmed. But what was his response? David acts in prayer. It says in verse 3, "I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise." And then again in verse 6, in his distress, "I called on the Lord. I cried to my God for help." And what's amazing about this passage is what comes next. After David cries to the Lord for help, this is how the Lord responds. It says in verse 7 that the earth trembled and quaked. The foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared out on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced with hailstorms and bolts of lightning. The Lord thundered from the heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning, he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at your rebuke, Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils. And I don't know about you guys, but I think maybe one of the reasons why I don't come to God in my distress, in my times of worry, or when I feel confronted and overwhelmed, is because I forget about who the God I'm serving is. I tend to have small faith when it comes to the God that I'm praying to. And I think the reality of this passage, it just shows the power of God when we pray. That when we pray, heaven is split open and God himself comes down and he moves in power. He shakes the whole earth when we pray. And I don't know about you guys, but I find that to be a very encouraging thing. And so the psalm continues on in verses 16 to 19. He says, "He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who was too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out to a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me." And so the pattern of this prayer, David recognizes God for who he is as a rock and a shelter. He also gives us a window into how he was feeling, distressed, overwhelmed. Then it talks about how God responded to his cries to him. And as David cried out to him, God split into through the clouds into his situation in power and in might. And then David, he feels as though he had been taken hold of, he had been drawn out of deep waters, he had been rescued, he felt supported, he felt brought out, he felt delighted in. And so my prayer and my hope for you, Capstone and Humber Valley, is that as you cry out to the Lord in prayer over this month, as you call upon his name, that God, you would recognize that God is at work answering your prayers in might and in power, that he is shaking the earth, and that you too would feel the same sense of peace that David felt. I pray, that God would bless you and be with you all. Bye.